but I don't know from where I have to turn off the speaker and turn on the headset. I don't see any option here.
In my case, it's where I can mute my microphone as well. There I have the option to choose.
Could you please stop now?
Hello.
Yes, yes, that's working. Thank you.
Or maybe you should log off and log in again.
Oh, I can hear you. I can hear you now.
Okay, fine, perfect.
Yeah.
We can also hear you.
And for some reason, I cannot turn on my camera. It says, vergebesten Sie sich, dass Ihre Kamera eingeschaltet und an Ihrem Computer angeschlossen ist. What does that mean? And I say, okay.
It means that you are sure that your camera is connected to the computer. Do you have a laptop with?
Yes, I do. Yeah.
With camera.
I have a laptop.
Be automatic. In my case, when I log in, then Zoom asks me if I want to turn on the camera in like at the first instance, but I don't know if it wasn't the same in your case, or if you can.
No, I didn't see anything like that here. It's let me just say Alt V. If camera could turn on.
Next time we do a conference in English, we should take care that Zoom is also in English.
Yes, in my computer, I bought it here, so everything in my computer is in German.
In German, yeah.
The computer for us and okay, you cannot see my face. It's not that important, I guess. You could at least hear my voice.
Yeah, at least. But it would be nicer also to see you.
It would have.
You have already tried to go out and go in again, haven't you?
Me?
Yeah. I had the impression that I don't know why, but often it helps.
I don't know. So is there any option in setting where I can check for the camera? System.
So I see that I can see when I look at where all the participants are, I can see that there's no sign for a camera at your thing.
Yeah, and from where then I can bring it?
Yeah, my guess is to go out and go in, then we can check whether it will be there. And
okay, ich verlasse jetzt. Okay.
Keine Ahnung, ob das funktioniert, aber also so zumindest könnte man es nochmal versuchen. doesn't look better.
No, I don't think so. It does not ask me if I turn on my camera. There's only two options: testing audio and audio surprising.
Are you using your headset at the moment? Because it sounds a little bit worse than the first time. Your audio. Now we cannot hear you.
Do you hear me now?
Ah, yeah. Mm-hmm.
I hear you too. Oh yeah. Or maybe I just put it on loudspeaker. I don't know. No. I think no. In any case, we cannot do the video anything from my side. So yes. So you are Maria.
We can hear you, but the quality is worse than the first time you logged in. I don't know if you have different setting now.
What about now? Do you hear me well?
It sounds a little muffled.
Yeah. Otherwise, I would just use the loudspeaker. Maybe because I'm using. Mary, can you please say something? Because I cannot hear you now.
Yeah, we can hear you, but the voice is not so clear. It's
on loudspeaker now. It should work.
mm-hmm. Yeah, okay. Then maybe you just speak a little slower so that we can
So
hear you.
what about now? So I come a little bit closer.
It's the same, I think. Somebody should invent something like elevator music for waiting on a Zoom meeting. Yeah, so hello everyone who already joined us. I propose that we wait some minutes. So maybe more people will join us. Okay, so it's some minutes past 4. I think we should start, and whoever joins us afterwards, still can join us. So very welcome to our talk today about gender-based persecution and refugee recognition, a feminist critique with Spotlight Afghanistan. It's the first of 5 events of our event series called People on the Move, Feministische Perspektiven auf Flucht und Ankommen. Yeah, the Refugee Law Clinic of Göttingen is organizing such an event series every summer semester. So next year you also should pay attention what we might do next year. Okay. At the moment, the world is facing several crises. We have still going on the COVID crisis, the climate crisis, and the war in Ukraine. But let's not forget about women in Afghanistan and people in general suffering under the Taliban regime. So I'm happy that so many of you joined us today to hear 2 experts on the topic. The idea of this event we got from the petition Feminist Asylum. We informed you about this petition already in our mail, and I will also post the link to the petition again at the end of the event. The petition will be handed over to the European Parliament on the 18th of May. So we have still 2 weeks to get more signatures on the petition. And I would be very happy if you would sign it and share it with anybody. There will be a press conference inside the European Parliament on the 18th of May, and there will speak also women from Afghanistan, Iran, and Kurdistan. And as soon as I have more information about this press conference, I will also share it with you if you're interested. But now to our talk from today. I am very happy to welcome Pia Storff and Suhaila Akbari. First, Pia Lotta Storff will speak about the international legal basis for the recognition of gender-specific reasons for persecution and illuminated from a feminist and post-colonial perspective. Pia Lotta Storff is a PhD candidate and research associate under Professor Dr. Nora Markert at the University of Münster. She studied law at the University of Passau with a focus on public international law and gender studies at La Trobe University, Melbourne. At University of Münster, she teaches fundamental rights law. Her research interests include migration law and anti-discrimination law with a focus on collective rights. After Pia's presentation, we will hear Dr. Suhaila Akbari. She will inform us about the current situation of women in Afghanistan. She will discuss their gender-specific discrimination by the Taliban in education, politics, and other fields. Dr. Suhaila Akbari is an Afghan legal scholar in exile and a former research fellow of the Max Planck Foundation for International Peace and the Rule of Law at the University of Passau. She did her doctorate on the thesis, The WTO Transit Regime for Landlocked Countries and its Impacts on Members' Regional Transit Agreements. After completing her thesis, she was an associate professor in Afghanistan and a consultant to the Afghan government on a trade agreement with Pakistan. At the moment, she is taking on as a co-director of the Institute of Law and Society for Afghanistan, which was founded in January 2022 under German law here in Germany. So welcome Pia and Suhaila, or Silla. And after hearing Pia, we might do a little stop for any questions of understanding you have about Pia's part. Then Silla will go on, and then we will have the opportunity to discuss and place other questions at the end. And for questions, you can use the chat function at the bottom, or just raise your hand and then we will let you speak. And the event is streamed on YouTube and also saved on YouTube, so anybody can see it later also, but we will stop the recording after the presentations, so the discussion part will not be recorded. Thank you again for joining us, and Pia, the floor is yours.
All right, thank you very much to your kind introduction. I'm very happy to be invited today to speak together with Suhaila Akbari on the topic of gender-based persecution and refugee recognition, to deliver a feminist critique and shed spotlight on Afghanistan. I am extremely honored also to speak together with Suhaila, and I'm finding it very charming that we both have the link to Passau. My background, as Marie Kranich already mentioned, is in critical legal studies, especially feminist and post-colonial approaches. In my presentation, I will focus on refugee recognition and refugee status determination and how it is conducted in Germany at the example of so-called westernized or Western-oriented women from Afghanistan. To give a little bit of a content notice before the presentation, I will speak a bit about forms of gender-based persecution and violence, but not dive too much into details. And I will also speak a little bit of the context of the Taliban takeover of power in Afghanistan. So to shed the spotlight on Afghanistan at first, I always find it very helpful to at first think about where in the world a country is located that we're talking about. This is why I try to find maps to just give you a rough understanding. Afghanistan has roughly 38 million inhabitants, and roughly 60% of the population is under 24, according to the CIA World Fact Book. And it is thought that humans were living in what is now Afghanistan over 50,000 years ago. So Afghanistan is very old. I will not dive into the details of the younger history of Afghanistan and where that becomes relevant. I will leave this part to Silla. I just want to make two little points about it. In the younger history, Afghanistan became independent from Great Britain in 1919. And one very important figure, as I understood it, was Queen Suhaila, who was the first consort queen of Afghanistan and played a major part in the modernization reforms, and particularly in regard to the emancipation of women. Then we have a jump in time. In 96, the Taliban took over power in Afghanistan for the first time. And then after 9/11, we all remember there was this international intervention to Afghanistan again. And Hamid Karzai was elected as the president of Afghanistan. And in February 2020, so another time leap again, the US and the Taliban signed the US Taliban Agreement, which contained commitments by the US related to withdrawal of Afghanistan with their military forces. And in summer 2021, a Taliban offensive quickly overran the country, and the Taliban took over Kabul in August of 2021. And there were a lot of different responses, which I will come to later. Now, maybe just one further remark why the spotlight on Afghanistan is really important right now. Recently, we've had reports from Berlin, but also from North Rhine-Westphalia, where Afghan refugees were moved and evicted from accommodations to other accommodations to create more space for Ukrainian refugees. So there is really the importance to also focus on the protection needs of Afghan refugees, also in Germany. Okay, then now I will say a few words to the international protection regime. Conceptually, the refugee is an exception to the sovereign rights of states to exclude foreigners or non-citizens from access to the territory. And the Refugee Convention itself is not a tool of transnational equality, but it is still inherently exclusionist and affirms the right of the state to exclude. However, it is also a widely signed human rights protection tool, which is life-changing for a lot of people and often provides for the only legal claim for protection. So we have a little bubble in the big bubble where people are in need of international protection. The refugee definition itself is exclusive. We have the cross-border requirement. We have where internally displaced people are not included. We have set grounds for recognition. And refugee decision makers in the EU and in Germany are often operating in highly individualized ways. There are high disparities in status decisions. So when you come, for example, from Afghanistan and have a very similar claim than other people who are also coming from Afghanistan, it can still be that your claim is adjudicated differently than your neighbor's claim, so to speak. And this is referred to among scholars also as refugee roulette. And sometimes it's also intransparent. To highlight this again, just a few numbers from the UNHCR global trends. So we have a lot of people who are internally displaced, and only some of them are refugees, and others have other different forms of protection, just to give you an idea. Afghan protection seekers in Germany can maybe be categorized in these 4 boxes. So we have the Ortskräfte, which is what I mentioned earlier. This is really has been the reaction to the Taliban takeover of power in August 21, when there were 10 days where, maybe you remember, German and other Western states sent evacuation flights, and the claims for emigration were very high, or evacuation was very high. We are not looking at subsidiary protection or the Abschiebeverbote or Ortskräfte, but we are looking at refugees today. Because also when you look at the Ortskräfte exception, there people got immigration visas actually, and then were safe, which is very different towards the illegalization that many refugees face when crossing state borders. So taking a closer look at the international legal sources of law, we have the widely known Refugee Convention, and in its Article 1A, it defines the term refugee and says the term refugee shall apply to any person who, owing to a well-founded fear of being persecuted for reasons of race, religion, nationality, membership of a particular social group, or political opinion, is outside of the country of his nationality and is unable, or owing to such fear, is unwilling to avail himself of the protection of that country. So again, refugees are only some of the people in need of international protection. We have a definition which has clear requirements. Those are the 5 requirements of the refugee definition. It's very important to look at it from a holistic perspective, but of course, the most important ones, or where the most struggle around are really the well-founded fear of being persecuted, and then for reasons of, and then one of the protective grounds. Here we see a picture which was taken in Kabul, I think, recently published on Al Jazeera. And this serves to also highlight the claim and the struggle for rights of people in Afghanistan still. And to just give you a rough idea of examples for persecution in Afghanistan that I read about, I'm sure Zilla will be able to speak much more clearly about really the persecution that is happening. So in December, for example, the ministry imposed restrictions on women from traveling farther than 72 kilometers without a close male relative. Then it also was expanded to include traveling abroad, and women could not board flights when they were traveling solo. Bans were also introduced in healthcare centers, forbidding women to access healthcare without a male relative. Then women are made to wear hijabs at workplaces. There's gender segregation in public parks and continued closure of girls' high schools, so no access to secondary education for girls. And so there are just some examples of what persecution looks like in Afghanistan. The definition of gender-based persecution is often based on the 1993 Declaration on the Elimination of Violence Against Women, and it defines gender-based persecution or violence as violence directed against a person on the basis of their gender or sex. It includes acts that inflict physical, mental, or sexual harm or suffering, threats of such acts, and other deprivations of liberty, whether occurring in public or in private life. So a number of discriminatory laws and practices and prosecution in that way lead to an affirmation of persecution in the way which is important for the Geneva Refugee Convention as a requirement to say whether someone has refugee status or not. And the things that we just saw and that I just listed amount to gender-based persecution. There is not really a big struggle around that. So looking at the refugee definition again was not that hard to affirm that there is a well-founded fear of being persecuted for women. We're now looking at the nexus requirement and especially the grounds for recognition. And so we have several grounds for recognition, and we could either look at gender-based violence as political persecution or as religious persecution or as a persecution due to the membership to a particular social group, or as a mix, or as all of the above, or as none of the above. And for example, one feminist scholar, Petra Sussner, argues that it is indeed the political and religious motives which mix together and then become gender-based violence. Others say, well, it's clear it's due to a membership of a particular social group, but without political and religious motives, it's not really tangible. You could now say, well, this is a merely theoretical question. Some of these grounds will apply, and that's okay because we got refugee protection then, and this is what we want. But the interesting thing about this, and the reason why we can use the Geneva Refugee Convention and the refugee definition also as a maybe feminist tool, is because is that intersectionality can be grasped with the mix of those different categories, and we don't need to have one person which adheres to the stereotypes of, for example, a gay person or a Western-oriented woman, as we will see later on. And the refugee grounds allow for a shift in refugee status determinations towards ascertaining not whether someone is something, but whether someone is affected by a certain type of violence due to something that is attributed to them, like gender trouble, like who are breaking from gender norms. How is it done in practice is now the next question. In Germany and also in Austria, we have the growing use of the membership of a particular social group, which is the group of Afghan women whose identity was westernized due to a longer stay in Europe. This is based on a 2003 UN High Commission of Refugees report on the situation of Afghan women who breach social norms. And Western orientation is conceived as a particular way of life, of leading a life, and only cis women are talked about so far with this. And under this group, asylum is to be granted if the Western lifestyle is equated with an oppositional attitude to the prevailing political and or religious norms, and therefore a person is threatened with persecution. So we have a two-tier test. One, a way of life in which the recognition, enjoyment, or exercise of fundamental rights is expressed. And two, that this way of life forms such an essential part of the identity that a person cannot be expected to suppress it in the state of origin. So one, enjoying your fundamental rights, and two, the enjoyment of your fundamental rights must be essential to your identity. Okay. I will talk about a paradigmatic case now, which is just really one of many cases where this figure of Western orientation was mobilized by German courts. We have here the plaintiff who claims to be a Westernized woman. In the event of a return to Afghanistan, she claims, she's threatened with persecution on the grounds of her gender because of the lasting imprint of being a Westernized woman. She lives with her husband, but leads a very independent life. And it is not about the violence currently, but it is about the Westernization. But let's take a step back and go to dogmatics again. Membership of a particular social group in Germany and in the EU, it is tested in a, again, two-tier test. We have to have a protected characteristic and the social perception as a group. The protected characteristic can be an innate characteristic. That means a person is born with it, or it can be a common background that can not be changed. So maybe important experiences that you share with other people, or maybe a class background, something like that. Or a characteristic or belief that is so fundamental to the identity or conscience that a person should not be forced to renounce it. And as you might have guessed already, in the case of Western-oriented women, it is probably the last alternative of a protected characteristic. And the social perception approach is tested also in two steps. the first question for social perception is the group identity distinct from the surrounding society? And then, does the surrounding society regard a group as different? So it's a little bit of a mushy test. You already see here, there's a lot of room for courts and decision makers to really say, no, well, what kind of group identity? It's just women, or to say, yes, it's that special kind of women, or whatever. So it is a little bit tricky to really work with these two, this two-tier test. And of course, there's a lot of case law regarding this. But turning back to Western orientation, the VG Lüneburg talked about the plaintiff in the case and said the plaintiff's appearance does not distinguish her from young German women. At the oral hearing, she wore clothing similar to that worn by German women of her age. She described to the court that she has not worn a headscarf or veil for about 2 years. And then it goes on and says she has many female friends, she loves makeup, she even rides a bike and she swims, she does yoga, what could be more Western than that? And here we can see the Taliban and the court in a way agree. This is not the Afghan way of life, but Westernized. Perception of the mainstream society is only one pillar of the test, as we saw. And therefore, the question now is for refugee law, do we reinforce the stereotypes by repeating them and adopting them and create a protection category, which is such as Western orientation, of the same name? And the other pillar, which is protected characteristic, is not necessarily Westernization, but really the will to live a life which is not dominated by patriarchal requirements. The court continued in this case and said that the plaintiff would not be able to resume a lifestyle adapted to the traditional customs in Afghanistan, the roles of women, because she left Afghanistan as a child and is not used to the gender requirements which are happening there. She tasted freedom in a way and now cannot go back. It said that the Western way of life is so deeply rooted in her and that it is the essential core of her personality, and her human dignity would be violated. So the court comes to affirm the protected characteristic because of the Westernization. It comes to affirm the protected characteristic and is not talking really about how fundamental rights or freedoms should be accorded to everyone, but are really here important for the international protection claim because she already lived in a different way outside of Afghanistan. So looking at the critique, the first thing would probably be that the Afghan society is portrayed as inherently backwards. And this is connected to the logic of suppression and of military intervention for democracy and human rights. It is blind to the changing history of the Afghan society and sees self-determination of women as inherently Western. The next question is, in the judgment, the court lists so many things that the claimant or the plaintiff does and has. It is the clothing, it is also her breach with, for example, the Muslim veil or the headscarf, and maybe also moving to more towards Christianity, which is more viable in other cases. And it has this dichotomy of host state and state of origin, where the state of origin is very heteronormative and backwards, and the host state is like the paradise of for freedom of women, and there is no patriarchal violence happening. And also, and this is maybe the main point of criticism, it also has the requirement that Western orientation has to be an essential part of the identity. And some scholars argue that this is actually a return of the discretion requirement. The discretion requirement is something which cannot be mobilized anymore by courts. It is first was decided in XYZ before the European Court of Human Rights in 2013 and referred to a homosexual applicant who could not be asked under the law to hide their sexual orientation, even if they neither do fulfill the stereotype of what it means to be homosexual or whether the importance to their identity was super high or super low. This cannot be important in assessing whether someone can enjoy their fundamental freedoms. The only question which is really important in that way is whether someone can enjoy their fundamental freedoms, has the possibility to do so in the state of origin or not. And if not, then the need for protection should be there. So a short outlook. Refugee recognition, feminist, what could be some feminist perspectives on that? Well, at first, also from a post-colonial point of view, the question has to be asked, which claims are legible to the law? And if the law can only, and the law in this case is of course also the application of the law by courts and decision makers, can only see women who look like German women in order to recognize, okay, they want to make use of their fundamental freedoms, live a free life in order to affirm their protection needs, then this is a problem. Secondly, we can still argue, well, in the case before the administrative court in Lüneburg, this was agency used by the plaintiff because by relying on the claim to be a westernized woman, she framed her claim and she got the protection she wanted and needed. Different ways of doing refugee status determination and to recognize refugees could be to center the violence on grounds of patriarchy instead of centering the Western orientation, to also allow societal critique and public discourse to address heteronormativity in host states. And I believe you will also hear one presentation in this row by Refugee Law Clinic Göttingen on heteronormativity in accommodations in host states. And then lastly, another feminist perspective could also be to advocate for collective refugee status determination when faced with collective threats for fundamental rights. And to come to an end of my input, when we have people in need of international protection, not everyone needs refugee status. People want to work. Some people need only temporary solutions like provided for in the Mass Protection Directive, but still the refugee definition is very small and could be broadened, like the OAU Convention used in the African Union, which also entails protection faced with when faced with mass disasters like climate change events or wars. Then to have as many people recognized as refugees as there are refugees under international law, the access to justice needs to be changed, because in order to claim refugee status in Germany, you need to come to Germany. And as you saw on the map before, it's a very long way. But when you are in Germany, you should be recognized as refugee. And this could be also achieved by shifting to more transparent standards, put less weight on credibility assessments, and have a standard of evidence which can be met. Okay, thank you. And I am looking forward to hearing from Silla about her perspectives on this category of westernized women, and also on everything else she has to say.
Yeah, thank you very much, Pierre, for your presentation and all the points you mentioned and all the critique which can be made about the current status of the law and also the jurisdiction. So are there any questions directed to Pierre's presentation concerning understanding? Yeah, I mean, more open questions, I think it's better to place them at the end. But if you have a direct question concerning the understanding. Okay, so Silla, you raised your hand, so please go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Pierre, for the very enlightening presentation. I learned a lot, literally, and I could use it in the future for similar cases for Afghan women here. I have a very short question about the types of refugee recognition here in Germany, especially about the Us Chapter. I don't know if I understood it correctly. If not, please correct me. Does that mean that during that particular period that the German military airplanes and other Western countries evacuated people and brought them here, so those people fit into the category of class? If that is correct, then most of these people did not obtain any visa prior to their entry into Germany or other EU members, because the airplanes, they just took us, like I was one of them, and brought us here. And then after a while, these people filed asylum application, which some of them got the answer, not the answers expected, and some of them are still waiting for an answer from the court. So yeah, is that correct or no? The people should have obtained visa to come here, because that's also another category of people that the Foreign Office accepted them as refugees, people who could have made into Germany, but prior to that, they have to go to German embassy and get a visa to come here. Do you mean that these people fit into the old cluster, or the people who got evacuated also are categorized under the old cluster category?
Thank you for your question, Faisala. I already read one comment in the chat, which I would also like to make. Unfortunately, your audio quality is still very, very difficult to understand. It was like there was a lot of kind of background noise, or it sounded in some way muffled. So I'm not really sure whether I understood the question acoustically. Do you think there's any way to change the audio setting?
Oh my God, I tried my best. I turned off everything that had a sound.
No, it's better already. It's better already in my mind.
So the question was by Us Taliban.
Silla,
yeah?
Silla, sorry, I have another idea. Do you have a German telephone?
I do.
Yeah, right. Because you can also call a number, and then you would be into this meeting via your telephone. So it's basically the same, because you don't have a video. So maybe this could be an option.
Yeah, we could try that.
It was the information was on the link as well, but I can also look for it again. So you have to call this number, and then they'll ask you for meeting ID and a code. Oh, I hope it's not too difficult, but maybe we can try. So I'll post the telephone number and then meeting ID and code. And before you log off, you should copy it.
Geben Sie Ihre Teilnehmer-ID und ein Rautezeichen ein oder drücken Sie die Raute-Taste.
Maike, can you see something if somebody logged in via phone?
I think she already is in the meeting, but I don't know if the audio works because I think she just tried to get into the meeting and I let her in. But wait.
Silla, I'm not sure if it's the same in your case, but I remember when I did it through phone, I think you have to press the hashtag symbol to put on your voice. How is it called in proper English?
That's fine. Like everyone knows a hashtag.
Sorry, everyone, for this complication.
Mary,
Yes.
can you please hear me from the phone?
I think we hear you through your computer at the moment.
I turn off my
But we can see that you are online with your phone as well. Did you hear what I said lastly, that you have to use the hashtag symbol to put on your mic with the phone?
I use the star because they said something with a star, so it's But now, yeah, I now click the hashtag, and I'm on the phone online. Do you hear me?
Or is there any possibility of the host to put on the mic of the
No,
telephone?
I think it's not possible, but I've Googled it right now, and you have to press the 6 to turn on the microphone. Maybe this will help.
Number 6.
Is my voice so bad on computer?
You would have to speak really slowly, and then we can try, but it's really hard. But yeah, if it does not work through the phone, then yeah, we just continue like that. But please speak slowly.
I try to speak.
But have you tried pressing the 6? Because I think we are nearly there, in my perspective.
Yeah, I clicked it.
It didn't work. Oh, missed.
No, I'm speaking. You guys should tell me if you're hearing me or not. Name?
Yes, maybe you could also try to get really close to the micro and speak really like super pronounced, like rap, like really. And I think it works because like single words come through.
Oh, I think now it works. Can you say something?
Do you hear me now? Do you hear me now, Mary?
Maybe you can just turn off the sound at your computer and just do it via phone, because otherwise we hear the backlash.
You have to log off from Zoom now, from your computer, and then only be here with your phone. Okay.
Yeah, on the phone. Do you hear me now?
Yes. I think now it works perfectly. Thank you for holding on.
Yes, thanks everyone.
I'm so sorry, guys, for this. I'm not a tech person, and it seems that Zoom meeting is not that easy.
But now it's fine. So maybe you can just start with your part, and then I think your question was quite a broad question, so maybe it's better to discuss it at the end, if you agree.
No problem. We could discuss that at the end.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you so much, everyone, for your patience. And Maria, thank you for inviting me in this very important and timely event. I appreciate the fact that you and group of other German students and colleagues are paying attention to the status of women's rights in Afghanistan. I appreciate it. Continuing with what Pia said about the current situation of Afghan women, which I confirm all of them, I start with this general and summarized sentence that currently there is no women's rights at all in Afghanistan. That should cover every aspect of what women's rights looks like and how it's lacking now in Afghanistan under the Taliban regime. Mentioning the very fundamental and basic women's rights, not just women's rights, but human rights, that is education. For 10 months now, adolescent girls above age 12 and above grade 7 are not allowed to go to secondary school and get education, which is a disaster. And going with
the right for work, the right to engage in political activities, in social activities, in cultural activities, the very personal choices that a young girl and a woman should have, they're all lacking in Afghanistan. And during the past 20 years, we had quite a good percentage of women and young girls working outside home, that today they are locked out. These women, maybe a very little percentage of them were working out of choice, to be free, to be independent, to engage in society. But most of these women were working to provide for their families. There were young women that they didn't have a brother or a father to provide for the family, or there were young women that have lost their husband and were widow and the only breadwinner of the family. Or the list goes on. All these women had reason to work and bring money and finance into the family. And today, now that they have lost their job, it's not just them that have lost an income, but with them, whole family have lost that source of income, and their kids and other family members are struggling with starvation, and the situation is disastrous. You read the numerous reports that the humanitarian crisis is at its peak in Afghanistan, and that starvation is increasing. Losing women's job is a very increasing factor in humanitarian crisis and starvation, because, as I said, these young women had a reason to work outside, and now they're locked at home. And the list also goes on. A woman cannot go outdoors because the Taliban thinks that women are made to take care of the household inside home, to upbring kids and children, and to obey their male guardians, especially the husband. And that is exactly what's happening now in Afghanistan. Unfortunately, every day we hear the news, we get the news that in conservative provinces, like the province I come from, and the remote areas which already were conservative, the people were conservative towards women, so the situation was not ideal for women even before the Taliban. With the Taliban taking over the power, the situation is extremely restricting for these women and girls. Coming back to goals, the prohibition of secondary school education, on daily basis, we hear from our surroundings in Afghanistan that some of these girls, some have already committed to suicide, because for some very ambitious young girls that they see the education a tool for a bright future, now they have lost it, and as such they don't see a future, and that's why some of these young girls have committed suicide, and some plan to, and some other young girls, they have gone into deep depression. So going into deep depression meaning that the next step would unfortunately be probably a suicide. So see, and traveling, let alone traveling, as Pia said, in the beginning it was inside the country, like how specific kilometers that a woman could go alone, and beyond that, she should have been accompanied by a male guardian, and that policy extended to a travel ban abroad. From my very close folks, I can give example that they needed to go abroad for treatment, for medical treatment, or to other provinces for some very legitimate reasons. And because they were not accompanied by male guardians, they were treated harshly by Taliban and were sent back home. And inside cities, women and girls cannot move freely. And Taliban have announced to all taxi drivers and transporters that they cannot let women and girls get into their means of transport if they do not have any male guardian with them. And this is disastrous, because these women and girls that I know, at least, they say that they either have to stay at home, or if they, for any reason, for any very legitimate, urgent reason, if they go out to the city to provide for their needs, they have to walk kilometers, go and come back, because there is no public transport to allow them to get in if they are not being accompanied with a brother, with a father, with a husband. And these women and these girls, not all of them have a brother and a father, or a husband, or someone that under the so-called Islamic law Taliban requires them to have. So, and the list of human rights and women rights violations continues and continues, and the more we dig into them, and the more we see that there is literally no women rights in Afghanistan. You cannot go to public institution all by yourself. You don't have a claim over your kids, because it's simply the father who has the sole claim over kids. And forced marriages. Let's talk about forced marriages. Just yesterday, I was reading a story from a friend in northern Afghanistan that Taliban are actually getting multiple times married with girls in these provinces, because, of course, no one can say no to the Taliban, not the father of the family, and not the least the girls. So polygamy is increasing, and that's happening by the Taliban and for the Taliban. And Taliban is explicitly and literally deciding on every aspect of women's life, from their hijab, their outfit. Taliban are even deciding for the color and for the pattern of the outfit that women should wear outside their homes. And today I was thinking, maybe tomorrow we wake up and see that Taliban has a new policy deciding that what women should have for dinner, for lunch, for breakfast. Trust me, this is the only thing that is left that Taliban has not decided upon. For the other part, like everything, Taliban decides for what women should do. And unconditional obedience of women for their husband and for their male guardians at home. And how many other cases that I could give. Unfortunately, there is a broad media censor in Afghanistan, and the media cannot cover all the violations that are happening. Otherwise, the report, the study, and the level of the violations would be very, very shocking to the world to hear that what's happening to Afghan women. And I could summarize the Afghan woman status in one sentence, that probably Afghanistan is the only country on the whole planet that its women are deprived of all fundamental human rights. And I guess that's our moral duty, Afghan people's duty, Afghan women like me who are abroad, it's our duty, but also it's the moral duty of people around the world. We live in a global community, and I think it's the responsibility of everyone that claims to be a true human rights activist or care about human rights to advocate for women's rights in Afghanistan, to force their government, especially this women's rights, human rights organization that happen to fail, to be honest. Frankly, these organizations have failed Afghan women, because the way they should have covered the disasters that Afghan women are going through, they have not, and they have not paid attention, the necessary attention. This is the time that maybe they should revisit their strategies, their plans, and they allocate time and energy and support, so that the government, the Western government, should be pushed to have a solid strategy and policy towards their treatment with the Taliban. Okay, we say okay, no Western country has recognized Taliban as a legitimate regime. Yes, okay. But the way this government, including even Germany, I was very optimistic at the beginning that Germany is doing good. Germany has not established any ties with the Taliban. It's follow the treatment, because unless the Taliban respect human rights, women's rights, rights of minority, freedom of speech, freedom of press, and so on, the Germany and other EU members won't recognize Taliban. But that's not enough. These countries should show in action that they are not flexible with the Taliban. And but unfortunately, they are softening their treatment. You see that a few months ago, Norway, for example, invited Taliban delegation in the way that the Taliban, from the transportation, the way that they were provided with accommodation, with everything, it was the diplomatic treatment. And this automatically gave the signal to the Taliban that, okay, sooner or later, these countries will recognize us. So this topic of women's rights and human rights, this is like a heated debate at the moment, and then by time, it will fade away, which unfortunately it is. We're seeing that it is. The Western countries are doing this because they are under pressure by the public. So see, the Taliban even understands the power of the public vote that people in the West have over their government. And that's my expectation and my Afghan woman fellow expectation, that please, Western public should continue forcing the government to be hard on Taliban and to draw a solid red line for the Taliban, that there would be no way the Taliban would be recognized unless Taliban would show in action that they would respect and they would perform women's rights and human rights. And that how they would do it, should do it, they should show it first of all in reopening secondary schools to girls. And besides that, they should ensure that there would be a standard curriculum in secondary schools, at universities, that what these girls would be learning, what these young women and men at universities would be learning. So these are the very first steps that Taliban could show. Otherwise, I guess, are just, excuse my language, pulling the West, and at some way we see that the West is buying it. And this is also so unfortunate that I read in media that some Western journalists, even some of them women, surprisingly, they're advocating for Taliban, like Taliban have changed. For God's sake, what change you could see? If the secondary schools are still closed in the 21st century, then what change are you seeing in Taliban? Back in 1996, I can share, you see plenty of videos and interviews by Taliban senior leaders that they say, okay, school ban is a temporary thing. Once we ensure that everything is under Islamic rule, then we reopen schools for girls. The girls have a right to education and blah, blah. And then during the first ruling area, which took 5 years from 1996 to 2001, the girls' schools were closed. They were never reopened. So Taliban lie, and they continue to lie, and the West should not buy it, and the public should also force their media that they cannot inject, they cannot sell all the lies to the public and fool us with this false information that Taliban has been changed. Taliban has not been changed. The only change is that they are lying to the face of the people in Afghanistan and to the world, and they are using media, and they are manipulating the West. That's the only change we can see. So I think I would repeat what Maria said in the beginning, that yes, nowadays a lot is happening around the world with the pandemic, with the war in Ukraine, and with the climate change. But please, I know all these global issues are important to address, to be continuously advocating for. But please, the issue of Afghan women is also vital. And this issue should not be forgotten among other global issues. And it's particularly the responsibility of we women around the world, human rights, gender-based organization and women rights organization, to have their voice continuously raised and their support and their advocacy for Afghan women until the Taliban regime should revisit its policies and its so-called false Islamic rules and reopen girls' schools to girls and provide women with their fundamental rights. and answer them, my expectation would be that no Westerner should allow her or his government to recognize Taliban. And if it happens in Sweden and Norway and Germany, wherever, we should all come together and force that government. That would be a huge violation of human rights by a democratic government against a nation. Maria, that's basically what I have to say in general, but we could go in details in case the audience have questions.
Yeah, thank you so much, Sila, for sharing all the information and the insight you have. And yeah, we are very happy to have such a strong voice like your voice here in Germany. And yeah, we hope we can support your pledge and yeah, bring this topic on the political agenda. And yeah, not forget it, at least. Yeah, thank you so much. So now, yeah, the floor is open for questions, both to Pia or to Sila, or in general, if you like to discuss something. You can write it down in the chat or just raise your hand, and then my colleagues will organize it a little bit and yeah, let you speak.
All right, I would begin with a few questions, and yeah, maybe to both of you. Like, I'm quite curious about how is the situation for women who are living alone, like without a husband,